Okay, so section 2 of this workshop, Introduction to the ISO 19115-2 Metadata Standard. We've talked at this point about what metadata is and why it's important to document it and what kind of general information needs to go into a metadata record. And now we're going to talk about a specific metadata standard. A metadata standard is basically a standardized way of organizing the information that goes into your metadata record. It puts, it asks specific questions about what kind of information you have, and it puts it in a specific order so that all metadata records of that same standard are going to basically look the same, so that when you're looking at a whole bunch of them and you're looking for specific data, you can just go to the same sections in the same place, and it speeds things up. Both for you as a user who is looking for data, searching for data sets, and also because it's written in something called XML, it allows machines to automate the searching and formatting of these metadata records that are written to the same standard. So the ISO 19115-2 is a part of a larger overall standard called 19139. The XML schema implementation is what it's called. Most of the information that we talked about in this first section are going to be under the green circle. Do I have a cursor here? Okay. So most of the stuff that we're looking at is going to be in the green circle. That's 19115. The 19115-2 includes everything in 19115 and also adds on stuff that's specific to geospatial types of data. So, for example, if you do a lot of imagery or aerial surveys and things like that with maps, 19115-2 includes extra tags that allow you to document all of that information. In addition, there's also a separate section called 19110 that's called a feature catalog. That's what FC stands for. And that is a separate document that it's a separate document where you're talking about all of your data set characteristics, like your table column headers and what they all mean. And in this particular standard, it's a separate document that you reference in the 19115. And we'll go into detail on how to do that. Okay, so the ISO standard is organized into two categories of stuff. There's sections and there's packages. Sections groupings of similar information, and packages are types of information that you might find in different locations. For example, contact information tends to be in multiple places. So there's a package called CI, citation, which leads to responsible parties. There's different types of places you can put that. For example, there's a responsible party that wrote the metadata record. There's a responsible party that did the project, so those would be the PIs. There might be responsible parties that distribute the data set, like, for example, if it's in a shared repository somewhere, the responsible party would be the repository. And so all of those different types of people would need to be included in the metadata record, but they're not all in the same sections. So that's what that is. To make it a little bit clearer, there are several. Here's the list of the sections of ISO metadata. This is the list for MI metadata, which includes the geospatial stuff. But it's basically all the same except for the very bottom one. Is the only new addition. Everything else is also in the ND, which is sort of the default basic metadata standard. Important ones that we use: identification information is where you put all of your information, like your title, your abstract, your description of your data set. Content information is where you reference your feature catalog. Distribution information is about where you can get the data set from. If it's a commercial data set, for example, it would also include things like how much it costs, how you can get it, if you want to download it, if you want to order it on a CD, all of that information will be in there. Data quality is, aside from data quality, it's also the place you put most of your methodology information, like what was the sequence of processing steps you used to get from your raw data to your finished data, your final data, and your data sources. And acquisition information at the bottom is basically the place you would put information about your sensors, your instruments, your platforms. If you have something that you leave out in the field for a long period of time and you want to describe what kind of sensor it is, what was the platform like, all of that information would go under acquisition information. And then here's the packages. So I mentioned citation, that's the one at the top, which is where you put responsible parties, which is where the contact information for everyone is. Some of the other ones, there's feature catalog. It's in the main document. This is basically something you would find in the content information section when you're citing the feature catalog, which is a separate document. Lineage information is where you would, it's basically what you call a sequence of processing steps, and that's what would be in the data quality section. There's both a data quality section and a data quality package, because sometimes you want to talk about data quality of specific things that aren't in the data quality section. And those are the main ones that we use. There's some other ones depending on what your data set looks like also. Okay, so now we're going to skip over to a specific example of an ISO metadata record that has been written and the finalized form of it. Okay, here we go. Okay, I actually got it set up. Okay, it's right here. I hope it's right here. All right, so this one is called Historical Submerged Aquatic Vegetation Distribution in the MBNEP area. It was written, well, the study was, this is actually one of several, I think this one is the 2015 one. No, this is a historical one. Okay, so basically what they did was they took, they looked at historical photographs and kind of pieced together the locations of submerged aquatic vegetation based on the photographs. So you can see from the record, there's at the top you have the title in very large print. Then you have 4 sections of information, just like that earlier example. You have identification, content, data quality. And then in the top part, you can see, for example, a file identifier. So this is my name because I wrote the metadata record. And then here's the top of the identification section, which shows you've got your abstract, which is basically what is the data set. And then purpose is why did we collect the data set. So there's 2 separate types of information about that. And then you have the first part, responsible party, is Roberta Swan, who is the director of Mobile Bay NEP. So we have her information up here. And the second one, Barry A. Vitter and Associates, was who did the study. And so we have contact information for them, and they're the principal investigator. There might be more, depending on, sometimes I've noticed that for example, Barry A. Vitter and Associates might subcontract out somebody else to do part of the project for them, and you might want to mention those people as additional responsible parties. And you might call them processors or something like that. Then the next part you have, for example, browse graphics are basically, well, they're basically metadata for visual data. In a lot of the data sets that we deal with, a browse graphic would be just basically a map of the study area with all of the station locations on it, you know, and a legend saying, you know, what are the station locations, where they're located. If you're doing a lab-based experimental study, you might have a diagram of your study design, for example. In this particular case, there are 3 of them because there were 3 sets of photographs, and each one had a separate overall map. Then you have different keywords that people can use to find your data set later, like submerged aquatic vegetation is pretty obvious. There's different types of keywords. We have theme keywords, which is basically the topic of study, and then place keywords, which is where was the study located. So in our case, Mobile Bay, Mississippi Sound, Weeks Bay. Then constraints is basically where you put all of the information about how the data set is allowed to be used. In our case, we pretty much just want people to acknowledge the funding agencies that funded the study and the principal investigators who conducted the studies. And there's a various amount of legal blurb that you can copy paste into your own if you want to use that or come up with your own. When I was talking earlier about data set licensing, the license information would go into this spot also. If you have, specific data sharing plans that you want people, if you're asking people to give permission to use the data, you want them to sign a really lengthy document that outlines in great detail exactly how they're allowed to use the data. You could put the text of that under use limitations. And there's actually ways to break it down into more than one big text box. Aggregation information, this is for the section where you would cite the reports that go along with your data set. So for example, the data set itself is an entity unto itself, but then the final report that you wrote about the data set it's usually helpful to have that accompany the data set so that people can read about the details of why you did it and things like that. So you want to cite those. If you were in academia, and you wrote peer-reviewed journal articles, you would cite those as being about the data set. Let's see, what else is in here? Okay, extents, that would be, for example, temporal extent is the time frame that your study was conducted. In this case, there are 3 of them because there are three sets of photos, so 1940, 1955, and 1966. You could do each of them as discrete entities, or you could just have a time frame like it started on this date and ended on this date. If you're documenting historical data sets and you don't know when the data set collection started, you could also say unknown. And if it's something that's still ongoing, you could say it's still ongoing. And so it doesn't have to be a definite start or a definite end. And then you have geographic extent, which is the spatial extent. In most cases, you can document the location of your study area with a rectangular box. If it's not best described by a rectangular box, you can actually, there are ways to explain a polygon in that space also. Content info is where, well, 1, it's where you would cite your feature catalog if you had a feature catalog. And 2, it's a good place where you can explain in more detail what the data set is, like what does it actually look like. So in the case of this particular one, it's a collection of TIFF files, and so you could say content information, it's a bunch of TIFF files, and then the other section of it was that it's a bunch of shape files because they took the TIFF files of the area of photography and put it into ArcGIS, and then they came up with shape files which has additional information on it. So, and then data quality would then be basically your methodology information. So what you can see here, you have lineage, processing steps. There's several of them. You can either break it down as a sequential series of steps that you did in order, or you can have different categories of information about the methodology. So, for example, this one has different, basically different paragraphs are in different processing steps. So there's different ways of using the individual boxes depending on what your data set looks like. Okay, so let's see. All right, so this is what it looks like in the metadata search archive at DISL after it's completely been written and it has been put on the web, and you apply a style sheet to it so that you can make it readable. While you're actually writing it, though, it doesn't look like that. It looks like, okay. What you're actually writing is not a nice, clean thing that's readable. You're writing XML text. And XML is a lot like HTML. If you've ever coded a website or a web page, you know what HTML is. XML is a lot like that. You have opening and closing tags. They nest with each other. And the tags are where it tells you, what kind of information is in the tag. XML is like a whole other, it can take a bit of learning to get used to the basic idea of it, but it's actually not that hard, as long as you understand that for each bit of information, there's both an opening tag and a closing tag, and you want to make sure that they're nested in the right order. It's not incredibly difficult to figure out. But so this is what it actually looks like. This is the same 1940 to 1966 historical submerged aquatic vegetation photography data set. So for example, starting from the top, you have a bunch of information referencing the actual standard. And then you can see here's the file identifier up here. Here's the top section is always about the metadata record itself. So it talks about who wrote the metadata record, which was me. And then as you scroll down, here's the title down here. And you can see, for example, darn it. Okay. Can't highlight here. Okay. So over here you see title. This is open tag title, and here's the actual title. And then close tag, which, it's a backslash and then or forward slash actually title. And then down here, further down, you see the abstract, and here's the purpose. There's opening and close tags for all of that. Here's Roberta, who is the custodian of the data set. Here's the principal investigator again. And there's going to be a lot of, it's going to look excessive to you while you're writing it, and you can mostly ignore it. You just have to be sure to put your information in the right spots. But the computer needs all of that information to be in there to make it look right when you're putting it on the web later. Okay, and so when we get to the next section, we're going to go into detail for exactly how you create this sort of XML document. Okay, and finally, over here is a Google Doc that has, it's basically the Google Doc that I assembled while I was learning how to do all of this myself. I basically wrote extremely detailed notes for myself and eventually turned it into something that other people could look at for their reference. So if you wanted to code your metadata record by hand, you could take sections. You can basically copy paste sections and then just change the information in them to the information you want, and as long as you keep it in the same order, it'll validate. And validation, by the way, is extremely important to a lot of people in the federal government. We don't really care that much about it, but you want to make sure mostly that the tags that you open are also closed and that it's all in the right order. And we're going to go into detail about that in a minute, but anyway, this template here is a place you can go to just get sample XML code that you can then edit to get your information in there. It's not a complete tutorial of how to do everything, but it'll get you started with not having to do as much typing, basically. Okay.
And Mimi, that is on the Sea Lab's website.
Yes.
Under the data management.
Yes, there is a link to all of the stuff that I've just showed you on the Sea Lab website. Go for it. And we will be. We're still in section 2, but we will be covering exactly where to find everything on the Sea Lab website in section 3. So let me just find where I left off. I think I lost my place. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so here's the links that I was going to. This first one was the final version of the metadata record as it appears in the archive. And the second, I showed you what the view source version of it, showing the coding for that record. And then finally, generalized template Google Doc is the location of where it's all nicely color coded, and you can copy paste sample code out of it and use it as a sort of a tutorial template. If these PowerPoint slides are going to be available later too, they can just click through all of these. So.
Yeah, as we record these sections, we'll have those on our website in the future, as well as the PowerPoint. So you guys will have access to that, and we'll notify you when all that goes live.
Okay, so the ISO 19115, or ISO standards in general, actually, they are all developed by an international organization that basically does nothing but make standards for things. And these standards are not actually free. I think this one costs like $200 or something. So what the federal government has done, specifically NOAA has done, is that they have they purchased the standards, and then they made extremely detailed workbooks that explains how to use the standards. So pretty much everything you need to know about how to use ISO is found in these workbooks and in their other resources online. And these workbooks are all free. So you can basically not have to buy the standard yourself. You can just download their workbooks and learn how to do it from there. So I'm going to go into some detail about how the workbooks are organized. They are basically, they work best as reference manuals. They're not, I mean, you're not going to be able to just read them cover to cover as light bedtime reading and understand how to use ISO. But so it does take a bit of learning curve to learn how to use the workbooks. So I'm going to go into that. When you open the workbook, this is basically the sort of thing you find in it. On the left, you see a diagram that shows basically lists of sections. So the overall top section is going to be MD metadata. And then within MD metadata, you have a whole list of other things that you can include. These are all different ISO sections. You can see that some of them are in dashed lines, some of them are in solid, some of them are yellow, and all of that color coding means different things. We'll go into that in a minute. And on the right, as you drill down into the various sections, you'll get more information about individual tags. So, for example, identification info, which is down here, is, can you actually see my mouse while I'm doing all that? Okay. Yeah, so it's an identification info in the solid line box, which means that it's required. If you click on, well, you can't actually click on it in the workbook, but if you go to the identification info section, it will then give you a list of things that go into identification info, and it'll look exactly like the same diagram on the left, except with different information, and then you can just keep drilling down until you get to the individual tags. And when you get there, then you have stuff on the right that tells you detailed information about what to do with all of the different tags and how they can be used and stuff like that. So here's a legend of the graphics. So, if it's a solid box, it means you're required to have it. If it's a dashed box or dashed lines, it means it's optional. If it's in yellow, it means conditional, which means that it's mandatory if you have that information. And if you don't have that information, then obviously you can't include it. Repeatability is another important concept for all of this. In most cases, you can only have one of something. So for example, the data set can only have one title, one abstract, one purpose. However, there are some other things that can be repeatable. For example, you can have multiple keywords. Sometimes you only have one, sometimes you have lots of them. If it starts with a 0, it means it's optional. You can have a minimum of 0 and as many as you want after that. If it's got a 1 in that spot, then it means that you have to have at least 1. And if it says repeatable, then you can have more than 1. And here's an example of what it looks like when you get to an actual tag. This one is for file identifier, which is basically an identification number for the metadata record. And generally speaking, it's good to make sure that the file identifier that you put into the metadata record matches the file name of the metadata record, so that it makes it easier to find, or something extremely close. Okay, so that's how the workbooks look, and I will give you a link to workbooks. I think I put it in here somewhere. But the other way that they've done it is that they've organized all of the same information into an online wiki, so it's a bit more interactive. And now I'm going to show you how the wiki works. Okay, so the wiki is basically like, it contains all of the same information as the workbook. The workbook is a PDF, so you can't really interact with it. You can flip through the pages and find stuff there. The wiki allows you to click through things. So for example, if you want to know more about file identifier, you can just, which is basically the top thing you want in the metadata record, you click through, and it will tell you that it should be a character string. And basically it's free text, you can put whatever you want that's text. There are other ones that say it must be a number. There's like date is a different one. I think there's Boolean, so like true or false. So there's different types of ways that you have to format it. This wiki is also color coded. Yellow is required. Blue is optional. I think that's how it is. Wait, maybe hold on a minute. Yeah, I know yellow is required because you have to have identification info. And blue and green are optional. One of those means conditional. I can't remember which one. Probably blue. Okay, anyway, so all metadata records have to have identification info. So we're going to go look through there. Okay. And then in identification, you have to have a citation, which is where you put the publication dates and the name of the title of your data set. Abstract is important. That basically explains what's included in the data set. Purpose is actually optional because in a lot of cases, whatever reason you collected the data to do your study is not necessarily going to be relevant to whatever someone else is doing with their data set. They could be doing a completely different study, and they just need your data for some peripheral version. For example, like most people doing coastal marine science will collect temperature, salinity, and basic water column data, and your study might be about something completely like the fisheries or the plants or whatever, but you're still collecting the temperature and salinity. And someone else somewhere else might need your temperature and salinity data to do. They might be trying to make a map of temperature and salinity across the bay or something. So they might want just that part of it. And therefore, the purpose of you collecting your fisheries data is not going to be extremely important to them. So the purpose field is optional for that reason. Credit means it's kind of a general, broad place that you can credit people that you're not crediting elsewhere. For example, in the point of contact, it's generally either the custodian of the data set or the principal investigator. If it's somebody who helped do field work, for example, and you want to just call out their name, you could put that into a sort of a broad purpose credit. Status is basically, is it completed, is it ongoing? Is this a metadata record that you started writing before you did any field work? That would be under development. Resource maintenance is, are you planning to update it? Or is it a historical archive that you're completely done with it? Even if you know there are errors, you're never going to do anything with it, you can indicate that. A graphic overview, that was with the browse graphics, where you could talk about, your study area, and you have keywords. Aggregation info is where you cite stuff. Okay, so anyway, so hopefully you guys recognize okay. Yeah, anyway, so how you use this wiki when you're trying to write something. You start, okay, so here's the view source again. At the very top, you always open your metadata record with GMI in my metadata. So that's your top tag. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that this is a close tag for the same thing, GMI in my metadata. And everything about your data set, all of the other data set metadata is in between. So, the way it's organized, you start with an open tag and you always close, and you close them in the reverse order that you open them. What's that wiki again? Okay, so how you use the wiki is that you start, okay, here's how you would format the opening tag. Yeah, I'm used to a Mac, and so when I try to copy and highlight things, it doesn't really work. All right, anyway, so you open with this tag, and then the next tag you want, for example, the file identifier, which is a character string. So over here's the next tag that you open, GMD file identifier, and then the character string, and then you put your character string in it, and then you close the character string, and then you close the file identifier. And that's that first little bit. So, here's, and you want to look at the capitalization of these things. It's always lowercase for the first word and then uppercase for the next word, and it runs all together. So you know that it's file, capital I, identifier. If you click through, it'll tell you a character string, so then you put character string in it, and then it doesn't go anywhere else after that, so you would put your text in there, close the character string, and then close the file identifier. And then you go to the next section, this language, character set. Eventually you'll run into places, let's go to identification info. where it doesn't just open one thing. It's an entire gigantic package, and you have lots of stuff. So we're going to scroll down a bit. Okay, here's identification info, GMD, identification info, starts as lowercase I, capital I, like that, which is these here, identification info. There's actually two different ways of doing it. We're doing this one, MD, data identification. In fact, that actually should be above. Hang on. Yeah, here we go. So GMD, MD, data identification is the type of identification info that you're opening. So that's, it starts with identification info, then it goes to MD, data identification. You click through that, and now you have MD, data identification, and then say the next thing you want to do is citation. So here we go, MD, data identification, GMD citation. You then click through citation, and at the top it'll say CI citation, and you can ignore that part. But you want to use this as your next tag, CI citation. Show you what that is. See, citation, and then CI citation, and then the next one is title, and the next one's character string. So here's title. You would include that as your next tag. And then you get the character string, which is the final tag, and then you put in your actual title. And then when you're done, you close all of that in reverse order. So if you just close that title, actually, scroll all the way over to the, I can't actually see it because I've got this recorder stuff going. But anyway, so you have a closed character string here, and you close the title. But you're not actually done with citation at this point, so you open the next one, which is date. But eventually, you fill out all the citation information that you want, and at the bottom, it says CI citation. You close that, you close the citation. And then eventually, as you keep going, you'll eventually find a close tag for MD identification and identification info, which is like, down somewhere. Identification info is a really big section, so it would be down here somewhere. Okay, notes under the extent. Yeah, here we go. So it's all the way down here. You close that, and then you close out the identification info section when you're done with all of that. And then the next section opens with content info, which is where you cite feature catalogs and stuff like that. And then data quality is also a separate section. So here's content info, here's data quality info, and then when you're done with data quality, you don't, in this particular record, there's nothing else you want to add, so you close out data quality, and then you close out the MI metadata. Is all of this making sense? Because it's kind of really hard to tell with no feedback while I'm just talking whether I'm making sense or not. But yeah, anyway, here's the title, here's the date that we were talking about, and then the info includes a whole lot of other stuff that you could add, depending on what you have. Well, this is citation, actually. So if you close out citation, then you go to all the other stuff under identification info. So here's the extent, which was near the bottom of our section. Okay. I think that was all I wanted to say about that. I think this is actually yep, okay. And here we are at the end of section 2. Are there any questions?